This week I want to ask the question, is being on the internet always a political action? And if it is, what is the right way to be online? But there is a broader question I want to ask alongside this, and it's hard to put it into words. One way to phrase it might be, is being online a big deal? Or can I just do whatever I want online? The easiest way to ask all of these questions together is, I think, to ask whether or not it's possible to be truly apolitical online. If existing online can be free of all political connotations. Now, my hope is that when you hear that question, your gut tells you, of course. Of course I can be online without being political. I do plenty of things online that have no political connotations. I really hope that's your thought, because that means there's a chance that by watching these videos, you might be able to expand your thinking just a little bit. By contrast, if you're already pretty sure that something is always political to somebody somewhere, these videos might give you the opportunity to think about how we can continue to act in meaningful and charitable ways within that context. To help me answer the question, is it possible to be apolitical online, I'm going to focus these videos around three imaginary internet users. A baseline user, an overtly political user, and, unfortunately, a dedicated internet troll.
I'm Ken M. Carthy, and I play a well-meaning moron on the internet.
When it comes to the brain, Ken M. says, brain cells can outlive the body.
Cells can't be destroyed, they just get recycled. The cells we're made of were once the cells of dinosaurs, and before that, they were the cells of a star, etc.
Stupid statement from any world viewpoint.
It isn't stupid, although it isn't the cells per se, but rather the molecules that make up the cells. We are all part of everything. I think it's kind of beautiful.
The very cells in our brains were once the cells of planets. It make us all related.
It isn't stupid, although it isn't the cells per se, says Ophelia. That is my point. It isn't cells, and Ken just continues with his ignorance.
There's actually more cells in our brains than there are brains in our entire body.
By thinking about these imaginary users, it's possible to think about different modes of using the internet, and also hopefully to easily map your own internet use onto one of these schema to see where you might fit on the spectrum of internet users. To get started then, I'm going to ask if it's possible for the baseline user to be apolitical online. By baseline, what I mean is the person that makes the statistical mean what it is. A user that engages with social media between 10 and 20 hours a week, streams a few hundred gigabytes of video content, and mostly sticks to the top 10 web pages with an average frequency. Now, how could anything this user does online be thought of as political? If anything, this is the user that, as typified in this blog post from the excellent Bitter Gertrude, asks other internet users to stop making things political when discussions about a piece of art become more analytical than simply heaping praise or expressing an unfounded dislike. Well, the means by which seemingly apolitical actions online can be thought of as political are complex and still, in terms of literary theory and political philosophy, open for debate. But one way that we can begin discussing the idea that the baseline internet user's actions online are political is to embrace the notion of political economy. A political economic view of society is one in which processes of distribution and consumption are studied from the perspective of symbolic, historical, and political perspectives. For instance, way back in 1996, Vincent Mosco argued that late capitalist societies, which is to say, societies that exist within a nation that aren't dependent on the existence of capital as materials or the production of goods for wealth, are mutually constituted alongside communication practices, that our economy and communication shape one another simultaneously. And this makes a ton of sense. A lot of jobs these days are what are called service sector, or what David Graeber calls bullshit jobs. We consult, train, or offer advice without making anything or having a very clear idea of the purpose or of our goals.
All right, kids, I gotta get to work. If I don't input those numbers, doesn't make much of a difference.
Instead of making jeans, for instance, in late capitalist societies, we instead walk around fancy offices and talk about the best way to keep jean making agile and innovative. We devise ways to make jeans integrated into an IoT infrastructure, all while enjoying a far higher standard of living. Sorry, is this getting too political? The point is, communication has practically become the backbone of our economy, and so the means by which we facilitate communication have real impacts upon it. It's not just that our economy is based on talk, it's that our economies and politics are based on how that talk is positioned within a hierarchy of skills, and what we talk about is simultaneously shaped by that context. If communication wasn't seen as such a valuable skill, in other words, the economy would be very different. And so would what we talk about and how we say it. From this perspective, being online, as much as the average user, begins to take on a new meaning. From the perspective of the contemporary Western political economy, being online, as much as we are, is not only honing our skills to contribute to the contemporary communication skills-based economy, it is actively continuing to determine the importance of communication. Think about it this way. Twitter is valuable because there is a perceived value in facilitating interpersonal communication, even when we're talking about nothing. Being more active on Twitter, and becoming verified for instance, imbues a user with a greater sense of value, but also makes Twitter itself more valuable, as this is the only place to see its content. The political economic perspective shows us how communication is a cornerstone of the contemporary economy. However, political economy changes with time and place. It doesn't help us to describe this specific moment, but rather gives us a framework from which to access a variety of periods of time. There are, for instance, essays on the political economy of medieval Europe. So how could we describe the political economy of now? Well, there are an enormous number of different political philosophies that have attempted to describe the current milieu. But one perspective that has received really significant attention and just seems to be getting increasingly true over time is Manuel Castells' network society, originally theorized significantly in his groundbreaking 1996 treatise, The Rise of the Network Society. In this book, Castells outlines how contemporary Western society is structured through the networks that are powered by microelectronics, information communication technology. He bases this idea on the notion that, unlike in, say, medieval culture, where networks may have consisted of your local connections that you could walk to, or possibly ride a horse to, or, say, in societies enabled by ships or bicycles, the society we have today is enabled by packet switching, the technology originally devised to allow for more stable telephone connections without needing human labor. At the same time, it's facilitated by new multi-directional switching enabled by optical fiber connections, but you might know it by its other name: telephone lines and the internet. When we begin thinking about how society today is shaped by vast networks, many things start to make sense. For instance, the emphasis placed on mixer events and corporations, the need to advertise and make connections beyond your place of work. Contemporary architecture and city planning begins to make sense too, as many buildings and cities today are designed to enable thoroughfare rather than allowing people to stop and linger. When Castells considered digital networks as the structuring force of contemporary society, this brought to light the power of digital infrastructural firms like Cisco Systems, an American multinational technological conglomerate that facilitates cloud networking and cybersecurity. They were once the most valuable company in the world, but were also responsible, in part, for the dot-com crash of the 1990s. What exactly do Cisco do? Well, a big part of what they do is management and consulting. However, they also outsource the designs for some of the most integral hardware to managing the internet traffic to many of the world's companies. If you wander around your university or office building long enough, you'll probably see a big black box with Cisco written on it. Could you say that Cisco keep the internet running? Not really. You see, the internet is really enabled through enormous undersea communications cables. And these were paid for a long time ago by various telecommunications companies and are now maintained by companies like AT&T or a country's government, and subsequently leased by companies like Google and Facebook. What Cisco do is help large organizations make the most of distributing internet access throughout large institutions or even through cities or entire countries. But today, most of their money comes from consulting on cybersecurity. Thinking about Cisco is useful, as it can help us to understand what exactly a company looks like in the network society, and what the everyday life of a human being is in relation to that. You might not ever know that you're engaging with Cisco. Your interactions with them online will be facilitated by them or made easier by them. A good comparison today, one that might make more sense to you, is Amazon AWS. You might not ever have heard of Amazon Web Services, but they provide the backbone for over 1 million online companies today. Twitch, Netflix, and even semi-competitors like Facebook use Amazon's web hosting services. What these are exactly are basically huge airplane hangars filled with computers that are never switched off, so they can provide you with access to memes. Even an institution like King's College London, for example, will use AWS for certain things. The institution will have its own servers held in a building somewhere in London, although if you look up their domain name, it's registered somewhere in Herefordshire. I don't know why that is though. But at the same time, if they need more storage or faster storage, they'll purchase some space on AWS. When we think about companies like Cisco and Amazon's web services, we can start to build a picture of how being online can be taking part in the network society, and how this doesn't require your knowledge, consent, or even conscious participation. Every time you turn on your computer and log on to the internet, you are sending a message to a host of different companies to say that you are still interested in the services that they offer and that you're willing to keep participating in the things that they do. In the next 2 talks, I'm going to discuss just how much of a bearing this can have on our internet use, particularly when we try to use the internet in either a consciously political manner or when we try to get around these connections and use the internet just for the lulz. But for now, I hope this video has made you think just a little bit more about the conditions of our economy today and how the simple act of going online is actually a complicated gesture of complicity in global megacorporations. To be clear, this doesn't mean that going online is necessarily always political, but it definitely isn't looking good. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions, be sure to leave a comment below.